realistically, it wasn't Active Directory. Sure, it had some origination from Active Directory itself, but there's no Kerberos, there's no, well, technically there is now a little bit, but there's no NTLM, there's no group policy, there's no LDAP. So it's not Active Directory. You can't just forklift your apps over into Entra ID, what was Azure AD, and actually make it work. That doesn't work that way. So Microsoft had Azure AD Domain Services, which was basically hosted Active Directory in the cloud, just like Amazon has hosted AD, managed AD. GCP has it as well. I did a DEF CON talk in 2020 where I went through and basically ran the Trimarc assessment tools against each of those managed ADs and to see what they were running and how they were configured, which is pretty interesting. But basically, that's what you have to do if you want to migrate from Active Directory to a cloud AD. You can't just move into Entra ID and do that. But yeah, it's rebranded. A lot of things are either Entra or Defender now. So at some point, I guess we'll have Microsoft Entra Defender thing.
The branding is very difficult for me on Microsoft. I still like the old terms. You know, I'll probably still continue to say Azure AD as just the normal thing. But you know, what I really liked with you, Sean, and like why I always love having you on this podcast or this webinar is, you really establish yourself as being really the subject matter expert in kind of the point authority on knowledge around Active Directory. You had, AD security that you came out with. And, I remember referencing those, probably hundreds of times, especially when I'm on a penetration test or I'm doing a red team engagement or, building defense for an organization or company. Your understanding of breadth, you really dove down niche wise into probably one of the most important components of an organization's security, controls that you have. I mean, Active Directory or Entra or Azure AD, we'll just say AD in general for everybody moving forward, is probably one of the most complex and central points of focus for almost every single breach that we see that has happened in the past 20 plus years, right? And going on beyond that. And, it's really the keys to the kingdom, as we often refer to in the cyber, in the industry, because, why go after one system at a time and have to find a vulnerability on every single system when you have this authoritative single sign-on, way of moving across networks and policies and to navigate those to get to sensitive systems? It makes a lot of sense. So, from your perspective and, what you see over at Trimarc, where are some of the main attack vectors coming from? Is it still Active Directory predominantly? Is it still Azure AD, cloud-centric, moving to kind of a combination of both? Where do you see, from your customers where they're really struggling with?
Exactly. So the answer is yes. I mean, as you've seen over at TrustedSec, I mean, certainly TrustedSec does penetration testing, red teaming, and a whole bunch of other things. We do things a little bit different because we're looking at the security of the entire system. So we do configuration setting analysis effectively, which kind of undersells what it is, but basically looking at all the settings in Active Directory, all the things that matter from a security perspective, all the knobs, dial switches, I like to say, the things that attackers could leverage in order to do something, escalate privileges, go ahead and persist in the environment, compromise and exfiltrate data. Those are all the things we look at. So whereas TrustedSec is going through and looking at different things and seeing what they can find and what they can escalate to, we're looking at everything and going, well, these are all the possibilities in the environment, and these are the best ways to close those doors and lock those doors. We were talking before the call about, like I said, the home security, and you could have the best lock on the front door, but if everything around on the ground floor is glass, all you need is a rock, and the rock will beat that $1,000 or $2,000 lock or whatever it is. And so we see the same thing. You can go ahead and put all the security around your domain admins in that environment in Active Directory. And we've seen this. We've seen an environment with a Red Force, the admin force that Microsoft touted years ago. They switched to Ramp now, which is a cloud-based system, which we have not seen anyone deploy since they came out with it. The interesting thing about that is we've seen that. And so, yeah, those Active Directory admins, those domain admins are very well protected because they're in another force. They're using Privileged Access Workstation PAWS. They're using PKI. They're using all the things that everyone talks about using. The problem is all of the legacy stuff, all of the things that are still in the environment. The thing that we always find are service counts. So before we deliver a report to the customer, we have what we call a subject matter expert panel review. So that's where we have a bunch of our SMEs for a technology area like Active Directory, and we
SMEs
talk
also
about
being subject matter experts for those that don't live by acronyms, but go, keep going.
Yeah, so it's SME, the SME panel review. So we had a couple of those this morning, and I love these because we're talking through what the environment looks like, what are the challenges, we're making sure that we identify all the potential security issues, we're identifying the best mitigations, the best way to fix it. And one of the things that one of the members of the team, Jake Hildreth, who released Locksmith, a tool that's great for identifying issues with your Microsoft PKI environment, your Active Directory Certificate Services.
By the way, probably
ADCS.
The number one most effective method for gaining, privilege access in an organization through, your CAs are going to be probably the number one most attacked. And that originally originated from like the research, I think, from Spectre, right? From Harmjoy and those folks. They did some really good research papers on abusing CAs, and then from there it became kind of a staple, just like local link multicast name resolution protocol. I can say that the local link multicast name resolution, but I can't do LLMNR. But
LMNOP.
Yeah, and NBNS and those types of attacks. It's kind of like the old school GPP stuff. You remember that, where you could decrypt the when they posted on TechNet the decryption key for the GPP stuff stored in Active Directory. Like the CA abuse became really a pivotal piece, very similar to like the spooler, type attacks and those types of ones. So, definitely a huge area of attack surface there. That's tied to AD, obviously. So,
right. And we see, I don't know, it's probably 80% of the Active Directory environments we look at now, or customers that have Active Directory also have ADCS, which is just crazy. And most of those have a critical when we look at it. So Jake Hildreth on the Trimarc team released Locksmith. It's on our GitHub. And so basically the cool thing about Locksmith is there's a bunch of tools out there that will scan ADCS and identify issues. Locksmith will actually tell you how to fix it and generate the certutil command to actually fix those things. So like one of the biggest issues with ADCS is there's zero auditing turned on by default. There's none at all. I don't know why Microsoft decided to do that, but there's no auditing. So Locksmith will identify that and go, okay, we'll turn it all on, and here's the certutil command that you can run per CA to turn all that on. But what I was saying was that during the SME panel review, we go through a lot of things, and one of the things that Jake always goes is, all right, well, is this going to be useful for the customer? Are they going to be able to do something with this? Because the cool thing about the Trimarc team is the vast majority of us had worked in operations before shifting over to security. And so we have folks with decade to 18, 19 years of Active Directory experience that have managed, administered, and secured these systems. And now we're working to improve things for customers, including doing webcasts and putting out articles. So you mentioned adsecurity.org. I am happy to announce here on your show that we are rebooting adsecurity.org. So it's going to start seeing articles.
So it's not going to be
again.
like the 1990s GeoCity looking website? Are you serious?
No, actually we are. We're going to make it MySpace themed.
Okay,
so that
okay, even better.
A little more comfortable for all of us.
Yeah.
Tom's still going to be our friend, so don't worry. We'll have Tom there.
No offense. Yeah, it's a great site. I like the simplicity of it. So.
Oh, absolutely. No, that was all me. So yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
Danny's going to make it look good, and we're going to get it rebooted this year. All the same content, all the same links, but we're also going to get some more content into it and start talking about and publishing information on things that we typically see, so that way folks can continue to reference it, because we've recognized that it's a resource really at this point for the community and for it's referenced pretty much in just about every pen test and red team report that our customers have seen, that they've told us about, and in a lot of the tools, the actual security tools for Active Directory. So we want to make sure that is able to continue.
I don't know how. I mean, every report that I see that comes through from a peer review perspective has a link to AD security on it. Our recommendations in our MDR products have AD security as a recommendation pathway. It's just great content. So in kind of jumping over to that. So for me, one of the big things I always get asked was like, how did you build a successful company? How did you get your name and brand out there? And to me, I think providing content like you do, and tools, content, research, kind of driving the way and establishing yourself as subject matter experts is what I think has helped a lot of us, our younger companies, like John, at Black Hills, always releasing great content, and his team is awesome as well with the tools they release and everything else. We're going against these big companies that are out there like, Ernst & Young and everybody else that, has, but we really establish ourselves different because we become subject matter experts in a lot of different areas. So tell me a little bit about how content's helped you, and why do you still release content? I mean, facetiously, obviously, there's the part of getting work out of it, but for me, it's always been, helping the industry, helping the community. Good karma creates good karma, and then eventually, if that returns back to me, fantastic. If not, I'm still, we're still releasing cool stuff from our teams. Curious to see your thoughts on how content's helped you.
Yeah, there's a few different levels to that. Certainly looking at it from the perspective of helping the community, making things better. That's always been a goal of mine. I know that's been a goal of yours as well. So we align on that. And certainly as I was starting out on my security journey and shifting over from operations to security and really moving in that direction and then launching Trimarc and getting things going with that, Dave, we had a lot of talks around that as well. One of the things that I learned about business, or a number of things that I learned about business, I learned from Ramit Sethi, Ramitsethi, at Ramit on Twitter. And the thing that he talked about that I really could kind of vibe with is the fact that everything to him is about the psychology of it. The Psychology of Money, which is how he really got popular and had a bestseller book about how people interact with money and the fact that budgets don't work. And what he did was he would release really high quality content for free, and then people would pay for it, and I paid for it as well. And there's always some gold nugget that I call it, which is something that's incredibly valuable, either in the free content, often in the free content, but also in the things that I learned later on through the business courses that he had. And for me, it's I took that same perspective. Like, I can help people and they can go ahead and do things on their own. But when they get to a certain point, they go, this is really hard. Maybe I want help to figure out a better way to do it, or maybe an easier way to do it. Then they can hire us. So my perspective has always been, first of all, from a small business approach, if you focus only on the Fortune 500 and you can only work with 100 customers per year, well, that's 5 years of work. And then those customers actually cycle through and get updated every 2 years or so. Maybe it's 20% of a shift in the Fortune 500. So then you add another, year or so to that, and it keeps growing. So you have plenty of customer, and that's just for the Fortune, the 500 companies on the Fortune 500 in the U.S. So there's always work available. There's always opportunities, but we can only work with a certain number of customers. So my approach has always been, let's publish some information to help make things better. And one of the things that I love is people that reach out to me and say, hey, Sean, adsecurity.org really helped me get a job in security. One of the most impactful stories was someone who has said, look, I grew up in this county in Mississippi, and there's really no opportunities there for anything. I worked at a law firm. I tightened up their security because of things that I read in your website, and they passed their first audit. And now I work for a Silicon Valley company, and I make more than anyone in my neighborhood, anyone in the area.
That's awesome.
And so to me, that's amazing. Like, I never expected or thought that I could have impact like that. But the reality is all of us have the impact, that potential, by publishing information, sharing information. So for me, it's about sharing the information, helping those be able to do their security job better. And if they want help, if they want the expertise and the knowledge that we have, because one of the things that we do as part of our assessment reports is we basically lay out, here's what you need to do first, second, third. These are the things to focus on first. And that way, those finite level of resources can be applied to the things that matter the most, including the quick wins and things like that.
Yeah, that's
things
awesome.
that we see way too often are still, old passwords on domain admin accounts, service accounts that don't need to be in domain admins. Like, all the stuff that Dave, you and I have been talking about for years are still there.
It's funny you mentioned that, because like I went through a phase about a year ago where I really struggled with giving talks, because I felt like I was still preaching the same things over and over and over again around doing the basics. And the basics doesn't mean it's easy. It's not easy stuff. Having to shift an organization to multi-factor authentication, or to do network segmentation, or to get a handle on cloud infrastructure, or change policy, or how a company operates, is not an easy thing. Like, vulnerability management is probably one of the hardest programs in an organization. I mean, it's extremely complex. You touch almost every organization in business. You have to have owners that clearly don't want to do that job in the first place. So and I really struggled, because I felt like I was talking about the same things over and over and over again. But consistently, if you look at all of these data breaches that continue to happen, it's the basics where we have faults. Now, there are ways of kind of sidestepping that through better visibility, understanding your environment. While we're trying to patch all this stuff, which is never going to be perfect, we have other things in place. More layered defenses, or as the old terms would say, defense in depth. we have all of these things, out there at our disposal. It's just very difficult to do, and it takes a long period of time to go and do it. So I think, for me, I had to take a little bit of a break from speaking because, if you go back probably 15 years of me speaking, it's been the same kind of talk. Now, things have evolved, things have changed, variations on it, but everybody still struggles with around, relatively the same things that are going on day after day. There's a very few amount of companies that have an amazing security program.
Right. I'd agree with that.
Yeah.
Because you're right, it is hard. We at Trimarc, I got rid of the word easy years ago. So we never say something's easy. We say it's more straightforward.
Right.
And as you said, the basics are hard. The same things that the industry experts, wherever they are, have been talking about since the beginning of time in this computer world, have been saying that we need to have better passwords. We need to probably use longer passwords. We probably need to have a second factor of authentication. We need to protect our admin accounts. Those things are very easy to say. They're harder to do in practice, but there are ways to do those in practice. There are better ways to do them, and it doesn't always mean paying a vendor for a product. Right.
Well, and you look at the shift to cloud. Now we kind of outsourced all of that to another organization that first of all, we probably didn't have a good handle on our own infrastructure. And now we're moving that to a different infrastructure where we have much less visibility than we did before than on-prem. Mm-hmm. And then you have, I'm sure you saw the CISA report on Microsoft and the previous breach that happened in 2023 with the Russians, but alleged Russians. It was definitely the Russians. But, when you look at even Microsoft failing at some of the most basic security controls, that CISA report was scathing.
It was scathing. Yeah.
It was scathing. I was like, oh damn! Like they didn't hold back at all. And they, one of the comments was, Microsoft should not rely on its customers to notify them of data breaches of their core critical keys to the kingdom, i.e., the root CAs. So it's those type of things that one, we're moving to a more complex technology, even though it might seem simpler. The management of that is still relatively unknown because we don't have a lot of talent in that area. I mean, finding talent in Azure, GCP, AWS is very difficult today still. And then you have, Microsoft, which, it looks like they're trying to restructure Microsoft to be more security centric, across their entire business line, which I think is just really cool. They're tying compensation packages, things like that. And this is not a knock on Microsoft, by the way. Some of the most brilliant people I know work at Microsoft, literally the most brilliant minds in the world. It's just, not embedded into their entire business and organization. You can clearly see that from the CIS report and previous breaches that have happened out there. But now we have this cloud infrastructure that's relatively unknown, not a massive amount of capabilities around monitoring, and then we're trusting a third party for that. That's creating a lot of interesting scenarios for us moving down the road, especially not just for sophisticated APT groups, but even some of the run-the-mill shops are focusing predominantly on cloud. Are you seeing the same thing?
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing that was interesting about that is we've been saying for years, not just Dave and I, but many others, that Exchange on-prem is dangerous when you connect it to the internet. It's too high of a risk. And even the cyber liability insurance companies were saying, really, we're going to have to attribute a higher level of risk to you if you have Exchange online or Exchange on-prem. So the answer was, okay, you go to hosted Exchange, right? And then I believe it was Rackspace that had their Exchange environment that was compromised a couple years ago. And now Microsoft had this token signing certificate that was released or was captured. Microsoft still doesn't know exactly how it was done, but they've mapped out how they believe it was done.
Which, by the way, should be terrifying to everybody, by the way.
Yes.
We're not exactly sure how it happened. We're kind of thinking it's this, but we don't really know. How they got access to everything. Okay, got it.
And with that specifically was the group that's called Storm, that Microsoft calls Storm, which is a Chinese threat actor, and basically captured that and then created a bunch of tokens, which of course you can do when you have that. But it was the consumer signing key. And so basically it shouldn't have been able to access and be used for any of the enterprise ones. But when the Exchange Online group, Microsoft Cloud went to a central API for all of it, for consumer and enterprise, but didn't do scope checks as part of that. And when Exchange Online joined that configuration, they didn't do scope checks as they're Microsoft corporate cloud is doing that. So there was this comedy of errors in cascading effect. And so then we ended up with a situation where a threat actor was able to actually create their own tokens to then access Exchange enterprise email. which affected about 500 mailboxes across 20 something organizations, most of them government in the United States.
Yeah.
And like you said, it was the State Department, according to the CISA report, that actually identified this because they had paid for the logging that gave them the ability to see who was accessing the mailboxes.
Which,
And
by
if
the way,
they
having to
hadn't-
pay for extra logging,
right, to
having
see
to
who's
pay
accessing it.
for multi-factor authentication rules because
Right.
you have to get an E5 or above. Like that's, can we switch that around a little bit, please? Like that stuff should be out of the gate, enabling security within organizations, not disabling to pay a different, steeper price. I can understand storage fees, log fees,
Right.
those types of things, right? There's a direct cost there, but not providing security features and functionality and visibility is horrendous in my opinion. Yeah.
Absolutely. And that was how State Department discovered this. They're like, this access doesn't make sense. And when they mapped it out, they're like, I'm not sure how this works. The CISA report documents this and basically said, State Department reached out to Microsoft and said, hey, we're seeing this. We shouldn't see this. Why is this happening? And Microsoft goes, you're right. This shouldn't be happening. And then when they figured it out, that's how the whole thing came together. Exactly.
Well,
but that's where we are in security today. And that's crazy.
I don't know if you saw the research that Paul Berkland did over here at TrustedSec with what he was able to do. He found essentially a flaw that allowed you to enumerate users basically by using an account, an Azure tenant, but it didn't have to be connected to anything. And you could use that to spam like millions of connections to essentially enumerate any username in any tenant, and also brute force and look for valid usernames and passwords without worrying about threshold lockouts. So you didn't have to worry about like it locking out an account, nor did it log it anywhere. Zero logging, not one. So you had no idea. So we can essentially enumerate the entire world. We can essentially brute force the entire world. And it took about a year for Microsoft to actually address and fix this. We didn't publish any of the findings. We did a DEF CON talk because they told us it was not going to be a fixed issue, that it was by design, and that companies could disable if they manually logged into their infrastructure, knew this one obscure flag to actually go and do, and then that was going to address the situation. Well, right after we did our DEF CON talk, it created some drama, which is great, but we Paul did a great job. He redacted all the information, didn't give away exactly how we were doing it, just showed that there was possibilities here. And even if you knew what Paul was talking about, you wouldn't be able to replicate it or do it, in that environment unless you had what we were actually researching, what he was able to find. And after a couple of big companies blew up at Microsoft about it, they finally moved it to, okay, we're going to fix it. And then it took 11 months after that, so it was like a span of like a year and a half to get this massive issue that, again, no logging, ability to brute force all day long with millions of sockets and connections, usernames and passwords. Like that to me seems like a big deal. Right. And that's what we're really fighting now is, we have our on-premise stuff they have to deal with. We also have organizations that are in small to medium-sized businesses that have no idea what they're doing. They're probably not purchasing E5 licensing because it's too expensive. So they don't have granular rules that you can do for multi-factor authentication, mandations, things like that. You're relying off of the security defaults. And then, you have bigger organizations and companies that are trying to scale massively and large in these big predominant environments. And they have all these different groups that are doing all the stuff that they have no control over or governance under. It's becoming a pretty big mess. And I think we're just starting to see the beginning of this. And then you start looking at like the stuff that they're adding with like Copilot. That's a disaster. Like they really need to kind of push things, I think, a little bit more granular and focused, and I hope they do. But I mean, for organizations and companies, it's a big hurdle right now to actually even do security. It's not easy.
It is. Yeah, it is very challenging. And what you hit the nail on the head. Like this whole situation that you mentioned is basically the calls coming from within the house. So once you're in that Microsoft network space, some things are trusted and some things are allowed, right? And there's assumptions that are made. Humans, we make assumptions all the time. So like, if it's coming from here, then it's got to be Microsoft. So we'll just go ahead and let that happen because it's probably some Microsoft service that's talking to some other Microsoft service to make the cloud stuff work when it's all just baling wire and duct tape,
Yeah.
And so the challenge with that is when you have attackers that are actually in Azure, when they're in the environment, when they're on-prem and then they're going after the cloud, a lot of the rules that are configured through conditional access are, okay, from on-prem, you can go ahead and do anything in the cloud without MFA. Because that makes it easier for the users. But it's that like trade-off between user satisfaction and security.
Yep.
Right. And one of the things that I've seen years ago or earlier in my career, it was basically there was pushback where, okay, if there's any challenge that a user has in being able to do their job, we need to remove that. So no friction, no barriers. Let them be able to do whatever they need to, which means users were local admin. You remember those days? A lot of people were domain admin.
See it quite often.
Yeah, exactly. So a lot of these things make it easier for the users to do something, but the security impact and risk with that is very high. And we're seeing at Trimarc the same mistakes that were done on-prem being done in the cloud in Azure, Azure AD now, Entra ID, where you have user accounts that are members of highly privileged groups called roles. We've gone through and actually mapped out the roles that are in Entra ID to then, there's 100 now, Dave. There's 100 roles that have some level of privilege in Entra ID at this point. Microsoft has about 26 or so of them that are tagged as privileged at this point. We've gone through and identified which ones that we consider level 0, which is effectively tier 0, and which ones are level 1, effectively tier 1, according to the old tiering model, because it's very confusing. Like Microsoft tags global admin as privileged, but also global reader is privileged. And those are two totally different levels of privileges on different levels of the scale. So to make it easier for our customers to understand things, and I did a couple talks recently about detailing this, and we're going to have an article out soon that'll have this information so that others can use it in their own organizations to better understand what the privileges are with these roles and why they matter. Something I noticed years ago was the hybrid identity administrator role, which I found in 2021. I reached out to Microsoft and I'm like, this is basically global admin part 2. Like, what are you doing here? And it took about a year of them working through and reducing it, because the challenge that I see Microsoft having is they're like, okay, we need to build it so that people can use it, and then we'll figure out the delegation and the ways that people are using it, which I understand. Right, I understand that perspective, and that's why we have 100 roles versus the original handful that we had. But the other reality is, organizations now that they have 100 role options should be custom crafting, like, what are the combinations of those roles that enable the people that work in their role, their job role, to be able to do the things they need to do. Obviously, it's not global admin, but what is that combination? So Microsoft kind of made hybrid identity administrator overpowered. They pulled it back. I was watching the permissions. They pulled it back, then they added some more back, and now it can control federation, which basically puts it at level 0. So and then there's a great article about that as well. So we'll get that article published soon in the next few weeks or so that way everyone can go ahead and read it and have that information. But it's in the slides that I did in my recent talks. Which, by the way, unfortunately, I put together a talk that I thought was pretty cool, kind of along the lines of what we were talking about, which is basically a decade of Active Directory security attacks that I submitted to Black Hat. It was not accepted, unfortunately. But I might do that for TriCon, because Trimarc has put together our own conference now. It's going to be July 28th. Let me just double check.
2 days before my birthday.
Yeah, awesome. So it is... Yep, July 28th. Just wanted to make sure I got that right. And we have a CFP for it, so it's blind. So if you have talks that were rejected at another conference, or that you have one that you're still developing, I know a lot of the conferences, typically submission timelines is January to like April or so, but this is one to submit to. It's single track. New speakers are welcome. Please, if you've never talked at a conference before, submit. I actually specifically requested that we have a couple of slots just for new speakers, because I think it gets very difficult sometimes to get your first speaking slot, in a conference. And
we used to do that at Derby, which is great. We had the new InfoSec tracks where we had people that had never spoken before. One of my favorite memories there is we had somebody that submitted to the call for papers email address, because that was like the only published one, and they asked, how do I get tickets to DerbyCon? And because we were obviously sold out, and literally I gave the person a speaking slot about how you purchase tickets at DerbyCon. So that's his first talk ever, and we drummed it up and hyped it up. It was a standing room only. There must have been like 500 people in this tiny room just for this. How do I purchase DerbyCon tickets? It was epic.
That was hilarious. I remember that. That was so great. One of the things I loved about DerbyCon was it's like, let's have fun with it. Let's just do that. Like that'll be cool. So the other thing I wanted to mention is if you have a talk that you'd like to submit, but you're not sure about it, that you want to submit to TriCon, go ahead and send me a direct message on Twitter. Hit me up on Twitter at Pyrotech3. So PYROTEK 3. Go ahead and hit me up. If you don't have my email address, I'll give it to you. You can send me the talk. I'll review it. I will recuse myself from being part of the review team for that, but I'll give you tips. I want people to be able to feel like they can submit to talks and get an opportunity. There's a lot of conferences around, but there's a lot of people submitting talks. It seems like Blue Team Con just put out, Alyssa over there, who's awesome, just published the information about the Blue Team Con CFP submissions. They could only accept 17% of the submissions they got.
Wow, that's crazy.
And that was a blind CFP. So there's a lot of people submitting talks to a lot of different conferences. But yeah, TriCon is an option. It's all virtual, and it's July 28th. So just before the whole Hacker Summer Camp Vegas extravaganza gets started, which I'll be there as well.
There's somebody on YouTube that said, his name is Jake Hildrath, just said, Sean helped me get my first talk submitted and accepted. So kudos, man.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm always happy to help. So
yeah, it's when you're going onto the, first of all, definitely check out the conference. I know I'll be tuning in for that. But one thing I wanted to hit on when you were talking about, how you were diving down into Active Directory and, Azure AD or Entra AD, whatever, what we focus on is vastly different, I think, than what you folks do. We're focused very heavily on, more of the cloud penetration testing side, what's possible from a validation and testing from an adversary and attacker, depending on your organization's, maturity posture, your monitor detection capabilities, what level do we need to meet to actually go there in your cloud infrastructure to do the same type of, attack that an adversary in your type of threat model would be interested in. Where you all come in, is really, everything from architecture, infrastructure, design, and current configurations and flaws that you can actually go in and validate, and how to structure your program. So, do you also do like let's just say somebody's looking at, migrating from Active Directory on-prem to Azure. Do you do a lot of pre-work for that to help them build it out, structure it, and build it? Or is it more after the fact that it's been set up, coming in and helping them structure it a certain way?
We've helped customers at kind of every phase. It's a good question, Dave, because there's still companies now, organizations that are going, okay, we have Active Directory, we're going to move over to Entra ID, we're going to move into Microsoft Office 365. We've helped companies basically figure out how to stage that, get it started, and then look at it again after it gets set up.
Yep.
So there's kind of a phased approach that we've done. Most of the time they're already in there though, or they have it set up and they've gotten some pilot users in, but they want to make sure that there's nothing that's going to bite them. I'd say one of the biggest issues that I see in Entra ID now is really around application permissions. So we have the same leveling system that we put together for the roles for application permissions at the tenant level. And some of those are very highly privileged. Yeah. And based on some research work that Dirk Jan Lemma did
Dirk's amazing. I love that dude.
He's incredible. Yeah.
He's great.
He
road tools
identified. Road tools are awesome. He put together this concept and this escalation path of like, okay, if you're an application administrator, you can add a credential to an application and then impersonate that application. So a password or certificate, what have you. And so if that application has the permissions to actually control the role membership to basically put anyone into global admin, then that's a clear escalation. And what's interesting about that is application administrator is not something that is generally seen as highly privileged or highly powered in most organizations. And then cloud application administrator has the same permission as application administrator does. And there's a few others that actually have those rights as well. So again, some of the things that we've mapped out that will get published, but I've talked to, was actually in B-Sides Dublin just a couple weeks ago and talked about it there. But these are the sort of things that are problems that most organizations don't realize. We did an assessment for a large multinational company recently, and they had everything pretty solid. Their conditional access policies were just crazy good, crazy good, to the point where in order to do the assessment, we had to get into a certain environment to work it, to actually look at things from there because most of the stuff was locked down. But when we were able to get what we needed and started looking at it, one thing that we found was that there was an application that had the permission to read mail. and it was a graph permission. So that basically meant that this one application could read all the mail and all the Exchange mailboxes in Exchange Online, which is something that is fairly common.
And by the way, probably just a flag that was added with their testing permissions, didn't even know about it,
Right.
and that's the thing, like the power that you have and how easy it is to go and make a mistake in that infrastructure environment. It's again vastly different than on-prem than it was before.
Right.
Yeah.
And here's the
now
fun
it's
thing about
exposed on the
that,
internet,
Dave.
by the way. So yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And the fun thing about that was that application had the ability to read all the mailboxes. There was a user account that was an owner of it. And so an owner of an application has the ability to add a credential to that application and impersonate it. So the compromise of this regular user account could result in the reading of all the email in this organization. So it's things like that that's interesting. And one of the things I when I talk to a lot of customers or potential customers, the concern they always seem to have is, I don't know what I don't know. And I think that really kind of encapsulates security today. We don't know what we don't know. Like Avanti looks fine until it's not, because we don't know what we don't know, right? VMware has had a ton of issues
ever.
But there's things that we know that we shouldn't be doing, right? But we still have, like we don't need a Unix application to the service count with that to have domain admin in the Active Directory environment. We don't need VMware to have domain admin in the Active Directory environment. We don't need a lot of these things like AGPM, which is a group policy management system. That doesn't need to be in domain admin. So one of the things that we do is not just go, here's all the members of your domain admins, but here's all the ones that don't need to be there.
Yeah.
And here's how you can actually do that. So our approach is very much understanding what the challenges are and how the business operations works and help navigate that path of security. So you were talking about how TrustedSec does this, Trimarc does this. Oftentimes customers will have us come in 3 to 6 months before a regularly scheduled pen test or a red team and come in and help them proactively get these things locked down and tightened up. So that way, basically make TrustedSec have to go to the back of the book instead of work off chapter 1, chapter 2.
We appreciate that. We enjoy
make it
that.
hard. Absolutely. And we publish some free information as well. So we have a paper that you can download from Trimarc or hub.trimarcsecurity.com for free, no registration required, and it's about 30 or 40 pages that Jim Sikora had put together on how to improve Active Directory security more quickly. And so basically it's a lot of the quick wins, the more straightforward things that you can do in the environment to tighten it up, to find these things that attackers are going to find, pen testers are going to find. Let's stop making things easier for pen testers and red teamers and the attackers, the threat actors. Let's make them have to flip to the back of the book, because at that point, detection is easier.
Right.
Because then they have to do a whole lot more. I mean, Dave, if you're not finding a member of domain admins that has a Kerberos spin and a password that's 3 or 4 years old, or a bad password because they're using a password filter, that's already a lot harder, right?
Yes, absolutely, 100%. We got a question from Mauricio Velasco.
Yeah, Mauricio.
Mauricio's
How's
awesome.
it going?
Yeah, he's awesome. Good, and appreciate tuning in, Mauricio. He said, what are your perspectives on the future of traditional on-prem AD environments? Are they being phased out, or do you foresee on-prem environments continuing to play a role for a long time?
That is a great question, Mauricio. By the way, Mauricio will be at Black Hat Arsenal showing off his badger.
Remember that was released.
I'm pronouncing it incorrectly, but go and check that out if you're around. I will be around there. I'll definitely check it out. Thank you for the question, Mauricio. This is something that I think 5 years ago, my answer would have been, Active Directory is going to go away. Now I don't think it's ever going away. I think it's going to be one of those things like Unix where it's just around forever. And the big reason for that is there's no clear migration path, as we were talking about, from on-prem AD to Azure AD and Tri-AD. And there's a lot of use cases where it just doesn't make sense to go away from being able to control your own destiny and control your own environment with Active Directory. Plus, you don't need internet connectivity to make it work and to make everything operate. So there's definitely manufacturing environments and situations where they don't want to go cloud because they need uptime. And a lot of manufacturing environments might have a week or two of downtime every 6 months, or maybe every 8 or 10 months, where they can actually make changes. And any time that's down outside of that, I think there was a ransomware attack on a manufacturing environment last year, and they were down for 2 months, 3 months. Just think about the amount of money that is wrapped up in that with that downtime. I mean, that's extensive and excessive. So the other part of that that's interesting is, say you're 500-person company that makes 3 million a year in revenue. So you don't have a large environment, you don't have a lot of dependencies, but that migration cost to go from what you have and what you've been using to a cloud-based environment that would enable the same sort of thing, assuming that you can just transfer things over, is probably going to cost you a few $100,000 at a minimum, not even including user training, checking to make sure that everything's working, piloting, the time involved. So you're probably looking at maybe $500,000 for this $3 million organization. That's a very high cost.
It's not happening.
Yeah, it's not happening. No one's going to do that. No one's going to sign that check and be like, oh yeah, well, for this massive percentage of our revenue, which doesn't even include profit, we're going to go ahead and do this migration, which doesn't give us any benefit.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of scenarios which are very similar. Those organizations and companies that have been cloud first from the beginning and like, well, we're already in the cloud. That makes it easier. I mean, we have customers that have an entire Active Directory forest because of one application. And that application just can't be moved.
Yeah.
And one specific example was that the vendor's not around anymore, and that application is licensed to the name of that forest.
They're
not going to pay the money to, have a company come in and reverse engineer. They're just going to figure out at some point they're going to move off that application through attrition.
Yep. And I would say that I fully agree with you on what you're saying. I think that most organizations, especially when you get into like the larger size organizations that are already established, that are, global, everything else, the change, the cost, the complexities, I mean, there's no way, at least not in my lifetime. It's interesting. I remember, Satya from Microsoft, the president over Microsoft, CEO, he said, within the next few years, we'll be fully adopted in passwordless, passwords. I'm like, buddy, I'm not seeing it. Like, maybe you see something I don't, but it's not happening in my lifetime. I just don't see the uplift that people have to do, the technology, the teaching, the training. We're still trying to implement MFA. There was some staggering statistic from Blue Hat last year, which was like 87% of Microsoft tenants don't have multi-factor authentication deployed. Like 87%. Like what WTF are we doing if you can't get MFA deployed, yet alone we're going to be moving to passwordless, right? So I do think that when you look at the complexities of having to deal with, an organization that's already established, on-prem AD will always be there for at least for our foreseeable future and our lifetimes. I think organizations that are just starting up, that are maybe more technology savvy or embedded in the technology, more kind of on the fly and agile, I think that's more of an easier adoption to move purely into that. The one thing I would say is that I think there's still a really good segregation of data and duty that you can have in a split environment like that. So for things that are going to be, less critical to your organization, hey, maybe cloud centric is more important. But our keys to the kingdom in manufacturing, maybe it's our chemical compounds that we manufacture and the temperatures and the actual intellectual property and the R&D that we have, right? Maybe we don't put that in a cloud infrastructure that only sits on premise, where we can actually have some, high security zones to actually heavily monitor those and protect those from various threats that we'd have from a threat actor. And I think there's some very good security defenses that way of not necessarily, I'm not saying don't go cloud. I mean, hey, leveraging, Microsoft 365 and everything else there fully makes sense for most organizations. But when it comes to like your intellectual property, what makes you unique, for example, our R&D team that does a lot of our, weaponization of tooling, security bypasses, code development, that type of stuff. It's all on-prem and it's very heavily protected, segmented in its own network, high security zone, heavily monitored, access controlled in and out, the wazoo, those types of things that are unique to us, we want to protect. I'm not going to put it in a cloud infrastructure, right? That's always been kind of our big hang up. And what we see for, a lot of organizations and their security strategies is like, hey, we don't want to move this to cloud. Trust me, it's not going to be a good thing from a risk perspective.
And you're right. It's all about risk. It's about weighing the risk, weighing the convenience factor, and it's risk profile analysis and figuring out what level of risk is acceptable.
Yep.
In the security field, I feel like a lot of us tend to be very risk averse because naturally that's what we're looking at. That's what we're figuring out. Going back to the example of the house, you could have the best lock on the door, but if someone regularly leaves the back door unlocked, then that doesn't help at all. Or if that lock is so impressive that nothing can break it, nothing can hack it, theoretically, but it doesn't get locked because it's too inconvenient to lock and unlock all the time.
Yeah.
It's like I saw something recently, I think it was on Twitter, where it was the cipher lock, which is the push button to lock to unlock it. And right above it, it says code is 56792, and then hit star. So it was so difficult for people to remember it.
Yeah.
They actually put a sign above it saying this is what it is. So that's the other side of the coin, which is we've got to empower the business. We've got to make sure that it works. And if there was a situation where that didn't work for you and your company, you'd shift that approach and figure out a way to make it work for another configuration.
Yeah.
We see a lot of customers, and I'm sure you have, where pre-2020 they were like never cloud. Post-2020 they're like, we have to.
Yeah.
Like we just have to enable these remote work scenarios.
Absolutely.
We have to make these other things work. Law firms that were always like never cloud have been moving in. We've done a lot of work with law firms, helping them understand what the risk is, how best to secure the environments, and how to ensure that there aren't risks that they aren't aware of. And I think that's the other part of it. Going back to the unknown unknowns. You can't quantify, you can't identify and understand what level of risk is acceptable without knowing what that kind of risk is. And going back to what you were saying, Dave, about vulnerability management, the first step of vulnerability management is asset inventory, understanding what you have, where it is, how it's being used. It's the same thing in security. If you don't know what you have and how it's being used,
How do you secure it?
yeah, exactly. I did a talk a few years ago about what I call the identity nexus, which is this connectivity between cloud and on-prem, and infrastructure and directory. So my examples were Active Directory and VMware on-prem, and Azure AD and Azure in the cloud, to keep it simple, but the boxes are there. And I still reference that in my recent talks, where there's like arrows that go back and forth because nothing is clean, life is messy, and things are connecting all over the place. And that creates unexpected opportunities, unanticipated attack paths for attackers, because we don't necessarily know how those things connect. And one of the things that we talk to customers about is understanding the authentication flow. One of my favorite interview questions when I was interviewing for an Active Directory position on the company I used to work for was basically, explain to me what happens from the time the user logs in to the time that they are able to get to their email and get to other things, and to go as detailed as possible. To understand, okay, how is a domain controller discovered? How do they authenticate? Is it Kerberos? Is it NTLM? What is that? How does that interplay actually work? The challenge is with a hybrid environment where the user logs into Active Directory and then they connect to a cloud resource like Exchange Online. That's far more complicated.
Yeah.
And then you add in things like MDM, mobile device management. You add in other security features. You add in mobile devices, like iPhones or Android phones or Android devices, tablets and other things, and bring your own devices. It gets crazy complicated all of a sudden, because now you don't just have a computer in an office which is on your corporate network. I would say the corporate network is dead. The corporate network is everywhere now.
Everywhere. I fully agree. So we only have a few minutes left. Give us an update on Vision. What's going on with it?
Trimarc Vision. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So Trimarc Vision is your security posture analysis dashboard for Active Directory. We're launching first with Active Directory.
Don't mistake me, but it's your first, product release, right?
Yes. Yeah. So it's a SaaS product. There's an annual subscription for it. We have opened it up for early access. So working with customers to ensure that we have the best product on the market for Active Directory security. And the only way that you get that is by working with customers to best understand what they're looking for and what they need. And I feel like we have that, and we're refining it to get it to the point where we're like, this is ready to launch. Now we're entirely bootstrapped. We haven't taken out any outside money. We don't plan on it. So that means that our development cycle is a little bit longer than a lot of companies. A lot of companies will take a few months and go ahead and,
you don't have $50 million to dump into an application right now, backed by a PE firm. So
my approach to external investments is a buy a lottery ticket every once in a while.
Exactly. Exactly.
We'll see if that works out or not. But yeah, no, I'm kidding. But no, we actually have the product. It is working. It is running. We have customers in it now, including a Fortune 100, and we have customers testing out, letting us know how it works for them, doing proof of concept. If you're interested in a proof of concept, hit trimarcsecurity.com.
What's its main function? Like, what does it do? I mean, obviously I know, but from everybody listening, like, why did you design Vision?
Yeah, so vision, the whole purpose of it is to identify at a glance across every Active Directory forest you have, because it's multi-forest aware. Basically, you put you install an agent on a server in each Active Directory forest that you have. Does not need domain admin rights, just needs regular user rights. And basically, with that, it can send to the Trimarc Vision Cloud and provide the information about the Active Directory configuration, and then parse through that configuration information in order to identify the most important security issues in that environment and provide that contextualized across every forest. And we also have the concept of basically forest groups that we call collections. And those can be regional, those can be business unit, those can be how people operate. So that way you can actually say, all right, well, you manage the North America Active Directory forest, so you have access to the North America collection, so you can just see those, or you have Europe, or you have manufacturing, or you have Asia. So that way global security can see the important security issues about every Active Directory forest, whereas the people that only care about their 80 forests can only see the information about theirs. The best thing about Vision is it's for operations and the security teams. So that way they're working off the same sheet of music.
Yep.
And we also have a remediation planner that gets generated automatically that basically says, here's what you should work on first, second, third, et cetera. And there's detailed information in the actual findings themselves of what was discovered. So that way people can click through and actually get things fixed.
Well, I've got to see it. I was really impressed, and it was kind of a huge missing link, I think, for most organizations to be able to continuously and actively monitor. So, these assessments are great that we do. You get a good structure in place, you get a good governance,
right.
Structure. You figure out where you did it, but the next change that comes into place, is that actually weakening your security? Is it introducing any new, exposures that you didn't know before? And I think, this is an amazing way of doing that, continuous monitoring, both, again, from operations perspective, misconfigurations, all the way to security threats that end up bubbling up. So I'm a huge fan, of what you're doing, and, appreciate it. But before we go, I have to say, like, how long you growing the hair out, man? It's beautiful. It's beautiful. I wish I could do that.
That's the one thing I have on you. I don't have the bulk physique.
Yeah.
Yeah. We'll see. Maybe We Hack Health is on my journey.
Absolutely.
But yeah, we'll see. I grew it out for during COVID because I didn't go to the barber shop or anything, and I ended up donating it. I got to 13, 14 inches of growth. Cut it, donated it, and then just figured I'd go ahead and grow again and see what happens.
Awesome.
And so this is for me. We'll see if I cut it off. I might get too hot this summer or not. I like to switch up my look every once in a while, so that way people never know which Sean will walk in the door.
You and Martin, you and Martin have the best hair I've ever seen in the cybersecurity industry. So you're the top hair. Men hair, dudes in the industry, I think, at this point. But and then last one, we got to get into some 90s and 80s and 90s nostalgia. If you see the new Beetlejuice trailer.
Yes.
What do you think?
Yeah, I think it looks good.
I think it looks good too. I think it's going to be really good.
Yeah, I'm excited.
It's crazy how they're able to make everybody look, at different ages and everything. Yeah. Beetlejuice looks exactly the same. I mean, it's incredible. So
he's timeless, Dave. He's timeless.
He is. Even in Batman, he's Batman. So,
yeah, exactly. Well, you asked me about Beetlejuice. I got to ask you about Back to the Future.
Yeah. What about it?
The new one.
So that's not real.
It's not real.
That's not real. I wish with Tom Holland, the Tom Holland one.
Yeah.
I wish it was real. They did it. It looks amazing. Which, by the way, is an epic storyline. It literally goes to his son, which is causing all these disruptions. It would have been really cool. Unfortunately, they're not doing it. It was more of a fan made AI generated with Tom Holland and those types of things. But I will say I've been definitely upping my collection. I got the original hoverboard that was used in the movie, awesome. And a few other pieces. It's downstairs at TrustedSec HQ. We have a new Back to the Future pinball machine coming out, and my DeLorean is getting a new engine put into it right now. So it'll definitely be able to hit 88 miles per hour, which is going to be great. So
finally,
those DeLoreans were not built well. They're amazing cars, but the electrical, everything else was a disaster. So I literally it's going to be a brand new car at this point. So
yeah, I have no doubt. Well, the original speedometer didn't even get up to 80.
No,
right?
Just went to 80. Just went to 80. That was it. And then so in Back to the Future, they put a Porsche engine in it. and then they had to retrofit the speedometer to go to 90, or I think it was 100 miles per hour in the movie, so they can get to 88 miles per hour. So I definitely have a fake, or I have a retrofitted speedometer as well that will get definitely to 88 miles per hour, which is great.
So the real question, are you putting a Porsche engine into your DeLorean?
It's actually an LS3, a Corvette engine, and it's turbocharged, so it'll give me about 700-ish horsepower or more. So I will definitely be able to hit 80 miles per hour and potentially even do time travel at this point. So we'll see. We'll see.
Well, if you do time travel, make sure you get me the book.
Yes,
I know you have the book.
I'll get you the later book.
The later book
for our ages here, so we can.
So that way I can win the lot.
So you can make Biff Towers.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I wouldn't do that.
Yeah. Come back and Sean's Biff. I was like, whoa, no, you would never be that bad, Billy. But anyways, well, Sean, I appreciate you coming on, and appreciate all you do at Trimarc and all the folks that work at Trimarc. We work really well with you folks, and I always like to bring on amazing people who have the same type of beliefs of helping the industry, contributing, and making the world a better place. And you've definitely done that with your career, the company you have, the people you have, and also with the vision release. Releasing your own product is not easy. I know this very well, all too well. And keeping it internal, developing over time, I think is the best way of doing it. And glad you guys were able to do it and release it. And I've heard nothing but great things about it. So congratulations.
Thanks. Yeah, I've always said I'm not releasing it until it's ready, and that's always been my approach. I mean, I've had to shut down a couple of assessments over the years that we've had. Just one assessment just didn't meet our level of quality. It was doing well. It seemed to really resonate with our customers, but it just wasn't where I thought the quality needed to be. So I went ahead and killed it. So that's why I make sure that what we do, if it has Trimarc on the name, that's my name as far as I'm concerned. So I want to make sure that it's above what the bar is for me. It's got to be, doesn't have to be perfect, but it's got to be top notch. And it's got to be something that's going to be incredibly useful. It's going to make it easier for operations to get these things fixed, because that's the thing that matters at the end of the day. So with Trimarc, I want to make sure all of our customers are able to get these things fixed, and it's not a situation where they're getting the same report over and over again. We never deliver the same report twice because our customers are fixing things. That's awesome. We've even seen in our vision proof of concepts with customers, they're getting things fixed. They're identifying critical issues, getting them resolved with a free proof of concept. I mean, you can't beat that.
Can't beat that. Well, Sean, appreciate having on, man. Always good. Always a pleasure. And we'll have to have you back on again here soon. And thanks everybody for listening. It was great to see, all you folks out there, Justin, Bill, Mauricio, Tyler, you name it, so many great folks that were on the channel, Spencer, all you guys, thank you so much for hopping on and listening to us today. And, stay tuned for more stuff from both TrustedSec and Trimarc. Thanks.